Every animated movie you've ever seen has a secret department that makes the whole movie possible, and it's probably a department that you've never heard of before. I would know because I worked in this department during my time at DreamWorks Animation on the movie The Bad Guys. See, it's on my shirt, and I got the mug to prove it. When people think of the crew that works on an animated movie, they probably think of the term animators to describe these workers. But did you know that that's only the tip of the iceberg? Animators are just one department. There's also modeling, rigging, effects, lighting, and even lawyers and accountants. Through every step of the pipeline, there is a department that influences every step of the way, and the part of the crew that organizes the entire movie. This department is called production. We're gonna dive into what production is and why it's so important. And if you stick around to the end of the video, I'll give you a fun story about creating the biggest effect in The Bad Guys. Oftentimes, there's more than 100 people working on an animated movie at one time, so let's try to visualize a structure to this team so that you can better understand where production falls into each department. Because I'm a visual learner, I'm gonna use what I call the tree metaphor to describe how animated movies are structured. A tree can be divided up into 4 major components: the root, the trunk, the branches, and the leaves. So let's start with the roots. The roots of our tree in this scenario will represent the studio that is financing the movie. Obviously, financing is the #1 way to make a movie, and without money, you can't pay anybody to help you. Our main focus in this metaphor will be everything above the roots, but it's always good to give our corporate overlords a shout out for funding animation. Also, here's a random fun fact. Did you know that Nike funds every single stop motion animated movie from Laika? The CEO of Laika is the son of the founder of Nike. That's for another video, but you should totally Google it because it's fascinating. Anyway, back to the tree. Next, we move up to the trunk. The trunk of our tree represents the leadership team, which includes roles like the producers and the directors. This core group is the heart of the animation pipeline, since all major decisions will stem from this group. Stem, get it? The leaves of the tree represent the artists. This is the part of the tree that is the most visible, which in our metaphor makes sense, because when you watch an animated movie, you are visibly seeing all the work that the artists have done. So what about the branches? The branches aren't always visible from the outside, but without the branches, there would be no way for the leaves to be supported and for the trunk to be fed. The branches, as you might have guessed, represent production. Production is the department that directly connects the artists, the leaves, to the leadership team, the trunk. And this was the team that I was on when I worked on The Bad Guys. While production themselves are not generating any of the artwork or animation that you see on screen, they are the ones supporting the artists, creating the work schedule based on leadership's needs, and tracking assets and shots through the entire pipeline. This makes it so that 100 animators and artists are not all directly reporting to the producer or director. As you will see in this video, the structure of production makes it possible to distribute work and notes. Let's take a closer look at the production structure to understand the hierarchy, but before we do, if you like the tree metaphor, please hit the like button so this video can be spread to more people and get the word out about this underappreciated department. When I worked on The Bad Guys, I worked in the effects department. This is the department that was responsible for all the tire smoke, water, explosions, dust, and a secret effect that we're going to talk about later after a spoiler warning. So make sure you watch the whole video to see the effect that required the cooperation of almost every single department. The effects department was structured in a similar way to every other department, so let's look at each role to figure out where production fits. Each department is split into 2 main sides: the artist side and the production side. At the bottom of the artist side, you have the artists themselves. These are the people that are working on every single shot in a specialized way. Our effects artists didn't touch every shot like some other departments would, since not every shot calls for effects, but each shot sent to a department will be assigned to an artist by production. Above the artists, you have the leads. These are the artists that have seniority over the other artists and act as both mentors and leaders to the other artists. Oftentimes, the lead artist will have a little bit more knowledge than some of the junior artists, and they can assist them where needed, but the leads are still working on shots in addition to their leadership roles. The leader of the artist side for each department is called the head. So in our case at DreamWorks, we had the head of effects that acted as the ultimate mentor and manager of all the other artists. In our case, our head of effects had a lieutenant called the effects supervisor to assist with some of the management, but not every department will have a second in command like mine did. And speaking of me, where did I fit into this department? Let's find out by breaking down the entire production hierarchy, slowly making our way back to the trunk of the tree, leadership. At the bottom of this hierarchy, you have the production assistants. These are your grunt workers in each department, and the ones that are responsible for a lot of the day-to-day tasks, like taking notes, sending emails, and checking in with each artist to see how they're progressing in their shots. This role is where I got my start in animation at another studio called the Jim Henson Company. PAs are considered entry-level jobs by these studios because their role is very localized to each department, and a lot of people people on the production side get their start as PAs. But to the credit of PAs, they're often working extremely hard to keep up in the fast-paced environment, learning new pipelines and systems as they go, while ultimately being paid the least out of everyone on the crew. Artists can often make 2 to 3 times more money than a production assistant, which is something that we can discuss later, but for now, just remember that the PAs are mostly responsible for a lot of the daily production tasks. Next up the chain of command is the coordinators, and this is where I come in. My role on The Bad Guys was the effects production coordinator. Where a production assistant is in charge of the daily tasks, my role was looking at the weekly tasks. Sometimes a department will have multiple coordinators or PAs, depending on the amount of artists and workload that's necessary to balance out. But a coordinator is given a bit more responsibility than a PA, notably that they are looking at the schedule more often and making sure that the quota for each week is fulfilled. For example, if an artist has a shot due by the end of the week, the coordinator is responsible for checking in with the artists, either themselves or through their production assistant, and collecting this information to report back to the production supervisor. That's in case any changes need to be made to the schedule to balance out the workload assigned to all the artists. The coordinator is also responsible for organizing the review sessions. The coordinator puts each artist's shots into a playlist and drives the meeting so that everyone in the room can see what's happening on the screen, while the PA would be in charge of taking the notes. After each meeting, the notes were cleaned up and distributed via email to each department for reference, and the database was updated with any approvals or fixes. As a coordinator, while I didn't exactly contribute any artwork to the film itself, there were occasions where I could make small suggestions to the head of effects, who knew that I'm an artist outside of my production duties, which is just so cool and humbling, and that's kind of indicative of people that work in animation. Above the coordinators is the production supervisor, who acts as the head of the production side of each department. They are responsible for creating the schedule for their department. The prod supes are more aware of the overall budget that's allocated and work within those constraints to create a timeline for their department. The supervisors will dictate this schedule to their coordinators and put them in charge of making sure that the artists are hitting their deadlines of each week. This isn't necessarily the case every time, but I like to describe the production supervisors as looking at the monthly tasks. So PAs focus on daily tasks, the coordinators on weekly tasks, and the supervisors on monthly tasks. There's honestly a lot of pressure on the production supervisors because the nature of feature animation is that the schedule seems to always be in flux and changing all the time, which means they have to be updating their schedule on an almost weekly basis. This isn't always the case, and sometimes it happens more frequently on some movies rather than others, but for the most part, production supervisors are responsible for ingesting any changes that come from the top down. DreamWorks production supervisors have more managerial responsibilities, such as hiring staff and dealing with any potential interdepartment conflict that may arise. So each department has a production supervisor, and all the production supervisors from each department report to the production manager. A production manager oversees all processes and outputs for each department, making sure that each production supervisor is hitting the quota that the overall production schedule demands. They are also the ones that manage the master schedule for production, indicating when each department will need to have specific sequences finished. As you can imagine, this role comes with quite a bit of responsibility, as they are the ones that ultimately handle department budgets and schedules. They're also the ones setting up the initial database structure and making sure that each department is reporting back through their database. Production managers can have additional help in the form of associate production managers, or APMs, who assist by helping foster communication between the production supervisors and the production manager. The prod managers report to the line producer, which is the role that's responsible for dictating to the production manager what the master schedule will need to be in order to release the movie on time. The difference between a production manager and a line producer does vary depending on which studio you work at, but the way to think about it is the line producer is the one that often represents all of production to leadership. If there are changes that need to be made to the release date, for example, the line producer is in charge of representing production to say what is and what is not possible in that time frame. They will then bring this information to the production managers, who are in charge of ingesting this information and updating the master schedule accordingly. Not all productions will have a line producer, but usually whoever ranks the highest will ultimately report to the producer. We finally arrived back at the trunk of the tree with the head of the production department, the producer. If a director is in charge of the creative vision of the movie, the producers are in charge of making sure that the directors have everything they need to make this happen. Oftentimes, producers are the first roles established in the production process. They're the ones that are in charge of hiring directors in the first place. They oversee the casting of the actors and voice actors, and they represent the project to the leaders of the animation studio. Producers are always thinking about the big picture and need to have an understanding of how long each part of the pipeline will take, and then make decisions accordingly to keep the entire ship on track. And ultimately, they're responsible for making sure that production as a department is able to handle the needs of all the artists to be able to complete the movie on time. If you've made it this far, it's finally time to talk about the big effect in the movie that required almost every single department working hand in hand to complete. As a reminder, I'll be spoiling a little bit of The Bad Guys, so watch at your own risk. Ready? In the movie, the guinea pig turns out to be the villain and commands a swarm of thousands of other guinea pigs to chase after the bad guys, or the good guys, in what became known internally as the guinea pig swarm. This unique effect meant that thousands of guinea pigs would have to act as a single entity, taking the shape of a large blob that could strike like a tidal wave. The simplified version of the pipeline was that the layout team created some really exciting shots and camera work, which required a stand-in piece of geometry to represent the swarm. Animation took this geometry and made it come to life, giving the general shape and structure to the swarm. Our effects team then created a simulation that would take the shape of the swarm structure that animation had created and made the swarm feel like a gigantic mass of individual guinea pigs. The crowds department worked to incorporate additional guinea pigs along the edges that would smooth out the effect and make it feel like it was made of individual guinea pigs. Then the lighting department created a treatment to give the entire swarm a painterly treatment so that it felt more like one singular mass. Because of the nature of this effect, the production staff were required to share information, files, timelines, and notes with each other on an almost daily basis for about a year. The initial development took several months of preparation, but by the time we actually got into shots, we were ready to implement our workflow. Because effects was handling a majority of the guinea pig shots, it fell on us to handle a lot of the presentations to the leadership team, culminating in one final meeting where I had to organize all of the shots into a single playlist that we screened inside the DreamWorks theater. It was honestly one of my proudest moments working on a film because it was one of our only in-person reviews, since we made this movie almost completely remotely. So seeing everybody's reaction to all our hard work was so fulfilling. I wanted to highlight this story because it really shows how production makes everything possible in the animation pipeline. The amount of cooperation that was required to coordinate between different artists and leaders and production staff was one of the most challenging things I've ever been a part of. Everyone had to be on their A game in terms of organization and communication due to the nature of so many departments needing to work together. If the effects team created something that required a change in animation, it was my responsibility to communicate that change to the appropriate department. And due to the nature of this complicated effect, this was happening quite frequently. Without the organization and structure that production provides, coordinating this effect would have been much more complicated than it already was. Production is one of the hardest working departments in all of animation, and it's really a shame that they get very little credit for what they do. There's a significant difference in salary between the artists and production, and while artists definitely deserve to be paid for their talents, an effective production team is multi-talented in their own ways, from production managers to production assistants. Production staff works just as hard as artists and deserve to be paid a livable wage, the same that artists are. Animated movies would not be possible if it wasn't for the hard work and dedication that production provides, and they deserve to share the spotlight just as much as artists do. Production is a skill, just like art is, and having been a coordinator, I can tell you that it's not as easy as it looks. So the next time you see someone in the credits of an animated movie with the word production in their title, just know that they probably got a lot of sleepless nights to make sure that you saw their name on screen at all. Working on The Bad Guys was one of the most special opportunities of my professional career. It was my first feature film after years of working on TV shows, and it will always have a special place in my heart. One day, I hope to become a good enough animator to work on any potential sequels that they make for this franchise. But in the meantime, I'll be practicing animation by creating my own animated short for virtual reality. It's called New Venice, and I'm documenting the making of it here on this channel, so if you're interested, you can check out the launch video here. If you want to hear me talk more about the feature animation pipeline, let me know in the comments. I hope this was helpful, and thank you for watching.